Thank you very much indeed for coming, for listening today. It's a real pleasure to be here and amazing to see so many people. And I really enjoyed Graham's talk, which was very much focusing on how people react. And I hope that in what I'm going to talk about, which is actually rather more practical, I can build on that and show really examples of what can be done, what more could be done, and some of the limitations in actually trying to make places really work for people. The focus of my presentation is really going to be on neighbourhoods, because that's where people connect with each other. And neighbourhoods are where you meet your neighbours going to school, to shop. It's where your sense of identity is formed. And if your neighbourhood feels like a good place to be, then I think you're likely to have a much more outward approach to your life. And I'm going to look at, I've been asked to look at the red line. The red line is a planning device, and apologies for those of you who are not planners, which is very much used to define an area that is going to be looked at, whether it's for improvement or for new development. And it's a very limiting device. You need to have limits because you can't do everything all at once. But if you just sort of confine your work to the red line, it'll be very, very limited in terms of actually dealing with people's behaviour and how they want to live in a place. And so what I'm going to suggest is there are two elements to the red line that we need to consider. One is a sort of mental thing, how when you think about anything within that red line, how people are going to use it, how they're going to respond, and how you maximise their benefits. And the other is how you actually make the red line connect with the area beyond. And looking at neighbourhoods in particular, neighbourhoods are where we're based. Some work very well for people, others do not. And the challenge really is to make sure that any changes allow neighbourhoods to get better and better, and any new development adds to what there is rather than detracts from the neighbourhood as a whole. And I'm going to really use examples. Look at the overall qualities of neighbourhoods, which is a combination of the streets, the parks and the buildings. How existing neighbourhoods can be adapted, how new development can be integrated into a neighbourhood. Look at new neighbourhoods, look at in particular social interventions which, when combined with physical interventions, make much more than the sum of its parts. And my talk will be almost exclusively based on experience of one way or another. I shall talk a bit about the EC1 area, which is where I worked for 6 years, where there have been a number of improvements which have really changed the feel of the neighbourhood as a whole, and where a series of physical improvements were planned, but planned with the social in mind. And I'll talk about that to start with and really look at different elements of it. Any work that I have done has focused on people wanting a greener neighbourhood, seeing that as very much a quality of life. And in 2007, CABE carried out an audit for housing in this country. And the findings from that audit was that generally people are satisfied with their homes. What they're not satisfied with is their neighbourhoods. And if they think about what they're not satisfied in terms of their neighbourhoods, the two things that stand out are, one is lack of green open spaces, and the other is the dominance of cars. And as I mentioned, wherever I've spoken with residents, talked to residents about their neighbourhoods, the quality of greening is, I think, the thing that they refer to most. And the interesting thing is that when you analyse a neighbourhood, there's almost always a lot of green area. But the quality is so poor that people don't use it, and therefore they're not aware of it. So in trying to look at neighbourhoods and improve it and make it a place where people want to live, really making those green areas function, linking them to their homes, linking them to the schools, is really an absolute top priority. It's a priority for their health and well-being. It's a priority also if people are wanting, as many people do, to have a more active lifestyle. The green areas provide opportunities for them to be more active, to garden, to to walk, to play, to meet people. So the greening is really important. And in all the work that we did in the C1 area, we saw improvements of green areas as fundamental, but we're also able to say, actually, in many areas, particularly areas of deprivation, like the New Deal area, people need support, particularly in the early stages, in being able to get maximum value of it. So whenever we did work on estates, we incorporated allotments for the residents, and were able to employ a community gardener who could help residents build up their skills and training. And that gave them much more confidence in all sorts of ways, but it meant that they could then use the allotments that were provided. The allotments in turn ensured that the green spaces were used by people, so they felt much safer. So all of these things are connected, and if you look at the planning and improvements together with these other opportunities, you get much more value from the investment. I'll come back later because I think that the greening is so important and maintaining of green spaces is so important. There's huge opportunity for social enterprises to really take that forward, to make sure these places are sustained in the long term. But I'll come back to that. Wherever a building program is going to take place, whether it's improving a park or housing, there is an opportunity to train people. And I think that this is something that is not used as much as it could be, but is in areas of deprivation where you have high levels of unemployment and underemployment, it's hugely important. Just to use an example, this particular park, which when we started was described as probably the worst one in London, Spa Fields in South Islington, and described as being designed perfectly for antisocial behaviour, but for no other purpose. When we looked at trying to improve it, the only people who were using it were what are called NEETs, young people not in education, employment or training. So we wanted to make it a place that was actually good for them, but also good for everybody else. And the designers worked very closely with all sectors of the community, but in particular with the NEETs, to try to find out what it was people were wanting, and then to link the actual implementation work with training. And so 13 of them were offered training and work experience during the work program, and 3 of them just ended up with full-time contracts with the contractor. It's a very good way to use opportunities of change in an environment to actually upskill people, and that applied subsequently to work that was done on parks and also to improve the outside areas of estates. I referred to more active lifestyles, which is crucial for people's health and well-being. So a real investment in making sure that all places were good for walking and cycling, were good for playing, good for sitting, places for people to meet and to access other opportunities. I don't think the other thing that can be overemphasized is the importance of streets. Streets are hugely important social places, as well as places for trade and places for movement. And too often, I think, when programs are thought about, people look at buildings, and sometimes they look at the green spaces, but they very rarely see the streets as the connector. But if you actually improve the streets, that is important, as I say, for walking and cycling, if they're designed from that point of view from the outset, but also for the economic vitality. And this is what was a really derelict street. It was had been a market, had been a thriving market, but not for the previous 20, 30 years. And we managed to secure money to improve the street. But while working with residents, what they said they wanted was to improve the market, to bring back the market. The council had said, market is dead, let it die, we'll improve the street. But actually, we managed to persuade them, and by commissioning a study on the regeneration of markets in conjunction with carrying out improvements, we were able to totally transform the street, not just physically, but economically as well. Local people, unemployed people, were able to take stalls, they had training to take in stalls, and the rate at which empty shops became occupied was phenomenal, and that was something that was demonstrated also on other streets where we saw improvements. But it wouldn't have happened had we not been able to think about the physical improvements as as well as the economic at the same time, and commission people who understood how street markets worked to actually suggest a whole lot of interventions which would gradually see the transformation. And it was their idea to start it by having festivals to show what the street would be like if it was reanimated, to show that actually money could be made from a street market. And from that, it has now become self-sustaining, and in fact is quite a popular destination. So, I'll hurry up because I can see there's not very much time, forgive me. But just want to say, potential for neighbourliness is hugely important. Reducing the dominance of cars. This is an example of where there was a street which was used for car parking, but was closed to make a piece of public street, and that improves safety. And I did refer earlier to the importance of social care of places, and I think that maintaining places is as important as creating new places that are attractive. This is Old Street, which won many awards, and where the residents wanted it to be colourful, which it was, but as soon as the programme ceased, the maintenance fell off, and it's actually nothing like what it used to be. But I think if there was a social enterprise, and there are examples in Southwark and Sheffield of social enterprises looking after streets and parks, and particularly planting, which are very successful. Putting it all together is very important, and that's where I think the challenge comes, which we should think about at the end. How is it that you can actually make these things work, and what are the ingredients? I'd just like to say one thing about designers and the role of designers. All of the work that I've shown was very much work with residents, but it was the designers who actually were able to take people to places they hadn't expected to actually show them there were opportunities that they hadn't thought of themselves. Without that, none of this would have happened. I just want to look quickly at sort of another aspect, which is actually looking at sites and the red line, and the importance of seeing beyond the red line. This is an estate where I've been working on in East London, an estate with a miserable external environment, right next door to a new development which you can see within the red line. There's actually a wall between the two. It used to be a hospital, and so a lot of effort has gone into creating a lovely new housing development the other side of the wall. There's quite a lot of Section 106 money that's going to go into various things in the neighbourhood but not adjacent, and yet right by it you have an estate crying out to be integrated with the whole. This is what I mean, it's a silo mentality of the red line. The new development only got planning permission on the strength that it had a play area, and so they just put in on the plan, well, we'll have a little bit of play equipment the other side of the wall. If you took the wall down, you could create a nice park which would serve the new development as well as the old development. But you've got your red line, you've got your mentality, so it doesn't happen. That's an exaggerated case, but it's everywhere, and I've seen it in many, many developments. Just wanted to talk also about new developments. Knitting them beyond the red line is also crucially important. Making walkable places, streets that link into the existing communities. And it's a mentality thing, but it's also to do with how you actually see a neighbourhood. And I'm interested by this particular neighbourhood, which is a new town extension to where I actually live, which is in Winchester. And if you compare it with a similar area, the area for housing is 4 times what the Victorian streets scene was. And there's no connection between the two. But if you also compare it with what I think is an ideal pro-social neighbourhood in Vauban, in Freiburg, the difference is enormous. It's a great big housing estate. But if you go to this much, much denser neighbourhood in Germany, it actually feels like a community, and the most astonishing thing is it feels much more countrified. You have a sense of nature, but also with density, and it's completely walkable. I've referred to streets, but I think they are really the core of what makes a place work. And getting the streets right is essential for all proposals. And it's not just the streets within, it's the connections beyond. It's interesting to look, there's a recent evaluation that's been done of Poundbury, which may not be to everybody's taste architecturally, but the focus on the streets has made it work. It's not just a housing estate, it has 200 jobs, there's resident satisfaction, and it has efficient walking and cycle network, as well as public transport. The connections are right, get your connections right, and places will work. And finally, I wanted just to say a bit about the opportunity. It was very fortunate when I was working in the first area that I've described, where a whole lot of adaptations were made, that it was in the context of a government regeneration scheme which no longer exists. But I think there are still opportunities now. There's huge pressure to build more homes, and all of those homes can be built with thinking about people, and also there are resources to do it. Neighbourhood planning, which is a very blunt instrument, but has potential to bring in quite a lot of this thinking, and I think can change places, not just an area that's been developed, but the whole neighbourhood. There's a lot of ongoing change. We're conscious, and something that we were discussing, a lot of monies are often spent in silos and therefore don't have the full benefit. But if you can link things up and actually look for different resources, you can do it. But what is important is that whoever prepares briefs thinks outside the red line, that you have leadership, community involvement and designers all working together. Thank you very much indeed.